Welcome to Module 1, Lecture 5. Up to this point, we have built the theory of financial networks. Now we make an important transition. From theory to code. This lecture is about representation. And that matters because the way we represent a network determines what we can measure, what we can simulate, and even what patterns we are able to see. Think of it this way. The same financial system can be stored as a matrix, a list, or an object in code, but each representation makes some tasks easy and others harder. So today we are not leaving theory behind. We are translating theory into a computational language that allows us to work with real data sets, build graphs, attach attributes, traverse structures, and visualize hidden topology. This is the bridge from abstract network science to hands-on analysis. Let's begin with the core question of network representation. This slide compares 4 common ways to store a graph: the adjacency matrix, edge list, adjacency list, and incidence matrix. The adjacency matrix is a 2-dimensional table where the entry in row A and column G tells us whether a link exists between 2 nodes. It is fast for edge lookup, but it uses a lot of memory, especially when the network is sparse. The edge list is simpler. It stores the graph as a list of connections, often written as pairs or triples like source, target, and weight. That makes it easy to store and iterate through all edges, which is why it is common in financial datasets. The adjacency list stores, for each node, the list of its neighbors. That is usually more memory efficient for sparse graphs. Finally, the incidence matrix links nodes to edges rather than nodes to nodes, which can be useful in algebraic or hypergraph settings. The big lesson here is that representation is a trade-off. We balance memory efficiency, lookup speed, and application needs depending on the structure of the graph. Now we move from data structures to graph classes. Not every network should be coded the same way. This slide shows 4 object models: graph, digraph, multigraph, and multi-digraph. A graph is undirected and single-edged, so it is suitable when relationships are mutual, such as stock correlations. If asset A is correlated with asset B, the relationship is symmetric. A digraph, or directed graph, is used when direction matters, such as in supply chains where goods move from supplier to buyer. Then we have multigraph, which allows multiple undirected edges between the same pair of nodes. That can represent repeated co-authorship or multiple kinds of mutual relationships. Finally, multi-digraph allows multiple directed edges, which is very useful in finance when the same 2 institutions can exchange many separate transactions or wire transfers. So before we write a single line of code, we need to ask a modeling question. Is the relationship mutual or directional, and can there be more than one link between the same entities? This slide shows the practical step of ingesting data, meaning turning a table into a graph object. On the left, we see a simple table with columns like source ticker, target ticker, and relationship value. On the right, that table is converted into a directed edge from Apple to Fox with a weight of 0.9. The code snippet uses a pandas edge list and feeds it into NetworkX. This is a very common workflow in real-world network analysis. Financial data often begins as a spreadsheet or database table. We do not draw the graph manually. We load it programmatically. The phrase vectorized loading at the bottom is important. For large datasets, such as Bloomberg data, we need efficient bulk loading rather than one edge at a time. So the key idea here is that coding a network starts by mapping columns in a table to graph components. Source becomes the starting node, target becomes the ending node, and attributes like exposure, correlation, or transaction size become edge metadata. Now the graph becomes richer. This slide teaches us that nodes and edges are not just placeholders, they can carry attributes. In the center, Apple is the main node, and surrounding labels show metadata such as sector and risk score. The edge from Foxconn to Apple also has attributes like weight and type, for example, supplier. This is very important in financial applications because the graph structure alone is often not enough. We need to know what kind of institution a node is, what sector it belongs to, how risky it is, or what role a connection plays. A weighted edge might represent transaction volume, while an edge type might distinguish ownership from supply dependence. You might notice the phrase arbitrary Python objects. That means these attributes can be stored as dictionaries attached directly to nodes and edges. So the graph is not just topology, it becomes a data-rich object that combines structure with economic meaning. That metadata then drives analysis and visualization. This slide introduces graph traversal, which simply means walking through the network in code. On the left are examples of iterating through nodes and edges and retrieving the neighbors of a specific node. On the right, the visual highlights Lehman Brothers in red and shows the institutions around it, such as Bear Stearns, AIG, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, and Merrill Lynch. The important lesson is that a network is not only something we store, it is something we query. We can ask, who are this node's immediate neighbors? Which edges have a certain weight? What attributes belong to this node? In practice, these operations are the basis for deeper analysis. Before computing contagion or centrality, we often need to inspect the local structure around a focal institution. Think of traversal as exploratory movement through the graph. It lets us zoom in from the whole system to one institution and its direct connections, which is often where insight begins. Now we turn to visualization as a heuristic tool. A heuristic is not a final proof, but a way of spotting meaningful patterns quickly. This slide shows 3 examples. First, pattern recognition helps us identify hub-like structures, such as institutions that may be too big or too central to fail. Second, outlier detection can reveal isolated assets or suspicious rings, which is useful in fraud analysis or anomaly detection. Third, community structure helps us see groups of nodes moving together, such as market sectors in a correlation network. A network in code is abstract, but once visualized, it becomes easier to see clusters, bridges, and peripheral nodes. Of course, visualization is not a substitute for metrics, but it complements them. It often provides the first intuition about the hidden architecture of the system. Once we decide to visualize a graph, how should we place the nodes? That is the job of layout algorithms. The slide compares 4 of them. The spring layout, also called Fruchterman-Reingold, simulates physical forces, almost like springs and repulsion, so connected nodes are pulled together while overcrowding is pushed apart. Circular layout places nodes around a circle and can make density and chord-like patterns easier to see. Kamada-Kawai is another force-based method, but it focuses more explicitly on path length distances and often produces aesthetically pleasing layouts. Spectral layout uses eigenvectors of the graph Laplacian, which gives it a strong mathematical foundation and often reveals deep cluster geometry. The key message at the bottom is excellent. There is no single correct layout. A layout is a lens. The best one depends on the research question you are asking. This slide gives a more practical comparison of when to use each layout. Spring layout is presented as the general-purpose choice. It is often the standard option because it naturally reveals clusters and works well for community detection. Kamada-Kawai can look very clean for small or medium graphs, but it is computationally expensive, with a cost that grows roughly on the order of n squared. Circular layout has low computational cost and is useful when we want to emphasize density or compare a small set of nodes, but it can become a plane of edges for larger networks, meaning the visualization gets cluttered fast. Spectral layout is computationally lighter, and especially helpful for large graphs or when we care about mathematically meaningful clusters. So this slide helps us think like analysts. We do not just ask what looks nice, we ask what is computationally feasible and what reveals the structure most clearly. This slide reinforces that layout algorithms do more than decorate a figure. They define what we might call network geography. The spring layout tends to pull communities into visible neighborhoods. Circular layout is useful for visualizing density or traffic-like structures around a ring. Kamada-Kawai emphasizes path length optimization, which helps preserve relational distances. Spectral layout reveals cluster geometry in a way that often separates major groups very cleanly. You might notice that the same abstract graph can look quite different under these 4 layouts. That is a powerful reminder that visualization is interpretive. The graph itself has not changed, but the spatial arrangement can highlight different features. In financial analysis, one layout may be best for spotting sectoral communities, while another may be better for seeing dense transaction flow or central intermediaries. So choosing a layout is part of the analytical method, not an afterthought. Now we learn how to encode meaning directly into node appearance. This slide shows nodes with different sizes and colors, along with a legend indicating blue for one sector and red for another. The large nodes are labeled as high centrality, while the smaller ones have lower centrality. This is a simple but very effective design principle. Node size can be scaled according to a metric such as degree, PageRank, or another centrality score, allowing the most important actors to stand out immediately. Node color can represent category, such as industry sector, community assignment, or node type. The result is that a viewer can see importance and group identity at the same time. In network visualization, styling is not cosmetic, it is a language. Size answers the question who matters most, while color answers the question what kind of actor this is. This slide extends that styling logic to edges. Edges can also carry visual meaning. The thick dark arrows on the diagram represent high transaction volume, while thinner faded edges represent lower weight and are visually de-emphasized to reduce noise. Arrow direction shows the flow of capital, for example from creditor to debtor. This is especially important in financial networks because directionality tells us how risk or influence propagates. If we are tracing contagion, we need to know where the shock originated and along which path it can travel. Weight matters too. A large exposure should not look identical to a tiny one. So by mapping width to weight, color to category, and opacity to significance, we transform the edge from a generic line into an informative object. This helps the viewer read flow, intensity, and importance directly from the picture. At this point, we confront a classic problem in network visualization: the hairball. When a network is very dense, the figure becomes a tangled mass where nothing meaningful is visible. This slide gives 3 strategies for taming that complexity. First, thresholding. Remove weak edges below a chosen cutoff, such as weights under 0.5. That reduces noise and keeps only the stronger relationships. Second, ego nets. Instead of plotting the whole system, visualize only the neighborhood around a target node. That is especially useful when studying a key institution. Third, community aggregation. Group nodes into supernodes. So the picture shifts from individual actors to higher-level structure. The key lesson is that readability requires selective simplification. We are not trying to hide data. We are trying to reveal signal. A raw hairball may contain everything, but because it shows everything at once, it explains almost nothing. This slide introduces edge bundling, another technique for managing clutter. On the left, the original network has so many overlapping edges that the structure is almost unreadable. On the right, edges that travel in similar directions are visually grouped together into bundles. The result is that the skeleton of the network becomes much easier to see. This is a smart compromise because we are not discarding all connectivity information. We are reorganizing it visually so that major flow corridors stand out. Think of it like grouping many roads into highway-like paths on a map. In large, complex financial networks, bundling can help reveal broad channels between communities, sectors, or layers of the system. So the technique improves readability without pretending the network is simpler than it really is. Labeling. At first, it may seem useful to label every node, but as the network grows, total labeling obscures the very structure we want to understand. The left side shows that mistake clearly. The labels pile on top of one another and the figure becomes unreadable. The fix on the right is the top N heuristic, where we label only the most important nodes, such as the hubs with the highest centrality. This is called the labeling paradox at the bottom. More labels do not necessarily mean more information. In fact, beyond a certain point, they reduce clarity. So a good strategy is to define a metric threshold, perhaps the top 3% by centrality, and label only those nodes. That way the key actors are still identified, but the network's structure remains visible. Up to now, most of our figures have been static. This slide shows why interactive tools can be powerful. In the browser-style example, we see hover tooltips, zoom and pan controls, and a cluster filter. These features turn a plot into an exploratory environment. Instead of showing one fixed story, an interactive graph lets the user inspect metadata, isolate communities, and navigate across dense regions. This matters a lot for large financial networks, where a static image may not be enough to explore all relevant details. The broader idea is that interaction supports discovery. Analysts can move from a top-level overview to a detailed inspection of individual nodes and edges without rebuilding the figure each time. This slide summarizes several important NetworkX algorithms and measures that support real analysis. On the algorithm side, shortest path methods such as Dijkstra and Bellman-Ford help us find optimal routes, which can correspond to efficient flow or transmission channels in a network. Centrality measures such as degree, closeness, betweenness, and eigenvector help identify influential or vulnerable nodes. Community detection methods like Louvain and Gervin-Newman help uncover clusters or sectors. Connectivity tools like breadth-first search or BFS and depth-first search or DFS allow us to explore structure systematically. On the measurement side, degree distribution tells us about overall connectivity patterns, clustering coefficient captures local transitivity, average path length reflects network efficiency, and diameter gives the longest, shortest path in the system. This is essentially the analyst's toolbox. Once the graph is built, these algorithms and measures help translate structure into insight. We finish with best practices, and this slide is a very useful closing checklist. First, start with the why. Do not visualize a network just to make it look impressive. The purpose is to reveal the hidden structure in the data. Second, choose the layout carefully. Match the algorithm to the topology and the question, such as spring layout for clusters or spectral layout for mathematically meaningful separation. Third, encode meaning. Use node size, color, and edge styling to communicate importance and category. Fourth, filter the noise. Weak edges and excessive labels can destroy readability. And finally, choose the right delivery format. Static vector graphics like SVG or PDF work well for reports, while HTML supports exploration. The final sentence is a wonderful reminder. A reading deck is a visual document with embedded context, not a text report with pictures. In other words, visualization should not merely decorate analysis. It should carry the analysis.